River of Thunder. The Hydaspes does not look like a battlefield until the night you try to cross it. In the monsoon darkness, the river is a moving wall, swollen with rain and silt, loud as an army and just as merciless. Lightning flickers behind cloud like a blade drawn halfway from its sheath, and for an instant the far bank appears, watchfires, spear points, ranks of men, and towering above them war elephants, hulking silhouettes that make the night itself feel smaller. On this near shore stands Alexander, not the marble statue of later centuries, not the flawless hero of songs, but a young king soaked to the skin, staring into black water with the calm of someone who has wagered his life so many times that risk has become a familiar taste. His soldiers cluster in shadow behind him, Macedonians, Greeks, allies, from lands already conquered, men who have walked from the Aegean to the edge of India and now hear a river roar like an omen. Across the Hydaspes waits Porus, king of the Porava realm, a ruler who does not send gifts, who does not ask what terms Alexander offers, who answers invasion with a simple, devastating certainty: if you want to enter my country, come and take it. The ancient writers will tell this story in different tones. Arrian, working from accounts attributed to Ptolemy and Aristobulus, frames it as a contest of intellect and nerve. Curtius Rufus and Plutarch linger on drama and character. Diodorus shapes it into the sweep of empire. They disagree on details, as they often do, but they agree on the feeling that hangs over this night like the storm itself. This is a battle where the ground is not ground, it is water. And water does not care how many cities you have taken. Imagine standing in the Macedonian line. The rain needles your cheeks. Your cloak is heavy, your boots suctioning in mud. Your hands are slick on the shaft of your spear. Somewhere a horse stamps and snorts, sensing the river's violence and the scent of elephants beyond it, an animal smell, musky and thick, threaded with smoke and wet grass. Every sound is magnified by the darkness, the clap of thunder, the creak of leather, the low cough of men trying not to be heard. You are close enough to the river that its spray dampens your face like cold breath. And you realize something that makes your stomach tighten. For the first time in years, Alexander's army is facing an obstacle that cannot be charged. The world before the storm. Alexander has already broken the spine of Persia, the empire that once seemed eternal, its king seated on gold, its couriers racing the royal road, has fallen under the hammer blows of Macedonian discipline and the reckless speed of a commander who treats caution like a rival to be defeated. Granicus, Issus, Tyre, Gaugamela, names that now travel ahead of him like thunder. But the farther east he pushes, the more conquest stops looking like a straight road and becomes a maze. India is not a single throne. It is rivers and kingdoms, alliances and rivalry cities that calculate survival with cold precision. Some rulers open their gates, some offer tribute, some, like the king of Taxila, often called Ambi, choose alliance, seeing Alexander as a weapon against local enemies. Politics here is not submission or defiance alone. It is a chessboard laid on mud. Porus sits on the opposite side of that board. He commands territory along the Hydaspes, known today as the Jhelum, near the Punjab's open plains and rolling riverbanks. He commands men who know this soil, this season, and the logic of monsoon war. And he commands elephants, not a handful, not a novelty, but a force of living engines, armored towers of muscle and tusk, trained to shove through lines and crush confidence as easily as bodies. Alexander understands cavalry. He understands infantry. He understands siege engines, walls, and the mathematics of fear. But elephants are different. They do not break like men. They do not tire like horses. Their sheer presence rewrites the battlefield before a spear is thrown, and Porus knows it. The river as a weapon. Porus's strategy is brutally simple: deny the crossing. He posts troops along the far bank, spreading watchers and patrols to cover likely fords. He keeps elephants positioned where they can smash any bridgehead the moment it forms. He holds cavalry ready to strike the instant Macedonians stumble out of the water, exhausted and disordered, perfect prey. Alexander's problem is equally simple: cross anyway. A direct crossing is death. Boats would be swamped. Men in armor would drown, dragged down by their own protection. Horses would panic in the current. And even if a portion reached the far side, they would arrive in fragments, scattered, wet, half-blind in rain, only to be met by elephants and fresh troops on firm ground. So Alexander does not fight the river head-on. He fights Porus's attention. For days the Macedonian camp becomes theater. Fires burn along the bank. Troops march and countermarch at irregular hours. Horns sound, then fall silent. Units appear, as if preparing to cross, then vanish. Under lightning armor, flashes like scales. Under darkness, everything becomes rumor. Porus responds exactly as a vigilant commander must. He shifts forces. He watches. He waits. He refuses to be tricked into leaving the river unguarded. But vigilance has a cost. No army can remain perfectly taut forever, not through endless rain, not through nights of false alarms. Even kings adapt. Even sentries begin to recognize patterns, and Alexander's genius is to create pattern, then break it. The decision point, somewhere upstream, the river bends. There are wooded banks, perhaps an island or a spit of land, where the current divides. In monsoon season, even the river's personality changes night to night. What was impossible yesterday may be merely lethal today. Alexander's scouts learn the river's moods. They search for a place where the far bank is climbable, where trees and storm can hide movement, where a crossing can happen faster than Porus can bring elephants down upon it. When Alexander finds it, he does not announce it. He separates the army with the cold precision of a butcher's cut. One force remains at the main camp, visible, loud alive, with the illusion of preparation ready to fix Porus in place. Another force, picked mobile, led by Alexander himself, slips away into darkness, marching upstream beneath a curtain of rain. This is the moment when a campaign becomes a gamble. Because if Porus guesses correctly, he can crush the crossing force in the river, drown the king of Macedon, and end the myth in one night of storm. And if Alexander succeeds, the Hydaspes will become a doorway. March into the black. The night thickens as the strike force moves. The ground sucks at sandals and boots. Men carry shields close as if to hide their own breath. Horses are led carefully, muffled, their hooves wrapped or guided to softer earth where possible. Lightning reveals faces, hard, hollow-eyed, determined, and then darkness swallows them again. You can feel the river before you see it. Its roar grows until it drowns the world. The wind off the water is cold. The air smells of wet reeds and churned mud. Boats are brought forward, some real craft, some improvised, some made from hides, stretched over frames if later accounts are to be believed. Lines are checked. Weapons are shifted so they won't snag. A man mutters a prayer. Another spits into the river like a challenge. Alexander steps to the edge. He does not look like a god. He looks like a commander who knows that courage is contagious and that fear, if allowed to spread, can kill faster than any spear. Across the water, Porus's watchfires glow steady and distant, as if the far bank itself is a fortress. Somewhere behind those fires, Elephants stand like statues of war trunks, lifting occasionally, tasting the rain-heavy air. Then Alexander gives the signal. The first boats slide into the current. The Hydaspes takes them at once, dragging, twisting, testing. Oars bite, men lean, horses snort in panic as cold water splashes their flanks. The river is stronger than muscle, stronger than will, stronger than the idea of conquest itself. But the boats keep moving. And in that terrible, thrilling moment, half drowning, half flying, Alexander's army begins to cross into India, not on solid earth, but on the back of a storm. On the far bank something shifts. A shadow moves where it should not. A distant horn, maybe real, maybe imagined, cuts through thunder. Porus's kingdom has heard the whisper of oars in the rain, and now the river at last has opened. The king beyond the current. Across the Hydaspes, Porus does not sleep. He stands where the bank rises slightly above the floodplain, a place where the river's breath drifts up in cold sheets, and the watchfires burn low under the rain. Around him the army of the Pauravas holds its shape ranks of infantry, with tall shields and spears, cavalry restless in the wet chariots, kept where the ground is firm enough to bear them. And behind them, spaced like pillars in a temple of war, the elephants wait. In the stormlight, they look unreal, massive backs draped with armor tusks, bound, or sharpened handlers perch like riders on living ramparts. When they shift their weight, the earth answers. When they exhale, the night fogs. Porus watches the river the way a hunter watches a trap, not with impatience, not with fear, with the steady knowledge that this water is his first wall, and that any enemy who tries to cross it must arrive already wounded, soaked, exhausted, disordered, perfect for being crushed. This is the king Alexander has come to meet. Ancient voices, Arrian, Curtius, Rufus, Plutarch, Diodorus will describe Porus in the tones of their own eras, some emphasizing his height and presence, some his courage, some the famous dignity he shows later when captured. They embellish, they argue, they turn men into symbols. But beneath the literary shine, there is a simple fact that defines Porus more than any legend he chooses to resist when others would bargain. Because in Porus's world the river is not just geography, it is sovereignty made visible. The Punjab before the clash. The Macedonians have not marched into emptiness. They have marched into a landscape already thick with politics. The Punjab is a web of kingdoms and city-states, each with its own rivalries, its own memories of insult and blood debt. Some rulers see Alexander's army as a calamity. Others see it as an opportunity, an iron storm that can be aimed. Taxila chooses the second path. Its king, often called Ampi in Greek, sources opens his gates. He offers gifts, supplies, and alliance. It is not a simple surrender. It is calculation aligned with the invader, and perhaps you survive. Oppose him, and perhaps you are ground into dust. And there's another reason, one that sits like a thorn beneath diplomacy. Porus is a rival power across the river. In the language of politics, the invitation is subtle. In the language of war, it is clear: use Alexander to break Porus. Alexander accepts because Alexander always accepts the path that leads deeper. But alliance does not erase the reality of the crossing. The Hydaspes still surges. Porus still holds the far bank. And Porus does not send envoys begging for terms. Instead, Porus sends something more dangerous than an army. He sends certainty. 2 kings, 2 visions. Alexander's ambition has become a kind of force of nature. He believes the world has an edge, and he intends to stand on it. He has crowned himself with victories so rapidly that even his own men sometimes seem to follow him out of habit, as if drawn by a tide. There are practical motives: control of routes, wealth, prestige, the logic of empire. But there is also something harder to name, something personal and consuming, a need to prove that no boundary is real. Porus stands for the opposite principle. To Porus, a boundary is not an insult, it is an inheritance. A kingdom is not a trophy, it is the lives beneath it, fields, villages, temples, families. His legitimacy does not come from the number of miles he has marched, but from the fact that he rules where he rules, and his people recognize his authority. So when Alexander demands submission, Porus hears not diplomacy, but erasure. And when Porus refuses, Alexander hears not pride, but defiance, an invitation to test the limits of his own legend. The Hydaspes becomes the line where these two visions collide. Porus's defense, water steel, and living towers. Porus has the advantage that cannot be trained into an army familiarity. He knows how the Hydaspes behaves after rain. He knows which banks crumble and which hold. He knows where a horse can be pulled under by sudden deep channels and where a man can find footing. He knows, too, that an enemy crossing in storm must choose between speed and silence, and that both choices have weaknesses. So he sets the defense like a net. Along the bank, watchers and scouts keep movement in sight. Patrols move with enough regularity to ensure coverage, but not so predictably that the enemy can map them easily. Fires burn as signals. Horns can carry through rain. Riders are ready to relay information across the line. Then come the elephants. Porus positions them not simply as shock troops, but as anchors, nodes of terror that can stabilize infantry and shatter attackers. In battle, elephants create no-go zones. Horses recoil, men hesitate. Formations bunch up and bunched formations die. Each elephant is a moving obstacle capable of turning a disciplined line into a panicked knot. Between the elephants, infantry can hold. On the flanks, cavalry can strike. And behind, reserves wait, because Porus understands something that separates a king from a mere warrior. A battle is won by controlling not just space, but momentum. If Alexander tries to cross en masse, Porus crushes the bridgehead. If Alexander tries to cross in fragments, Porus destroys them in detail. If Alexander delays, Porus waits, because the river itself fights on Porus's side. It is on paper an ideal defense, and Alexander knows it. Alexander's counter, the war for attention. So Alexander fights Porus where Porus cannot bring elephants in Porus's mind. Day after day, Alexander turns the riverbank into a performance. Troops appear, dig, assemble, shift. Cavalry rides up, then falls back. Fires multiply. Noise rises, then vanishes. At night, columns move in the dark and return by dawn, leaving Porus to wonder if he missed the real attempt. Porus cannot ignore any of it. If he guesses wrong, even once the Macedonians might seize a crossing point and land behind his prepared line. And once Alexander is on firm ground, with room to deploy, the river stops being a fortress and becomes merely scenery. So Porus matches the feints. He shifts elephants. He shifts cavalry. He keeps the army ready. That readiness is strength, but it is also strain. Men do not sleep deeply when they expect horns. Horses do not rest when the air tastes of danger. Officers cannot keep every sentry at a fever pitch forever. Even disciplined watchfulness begins to harden into routine, another night of noise, another night of nothing. That is the crack Alexander is looking for. The first real alarm. It begins not with a clash, but with a rider. He comes in hard through a rain cloak plastered to his shoulders, mud sprayed up his legs. He swings down before Porus's guard and speaks quickly, breath steaming. Upstream movement, not the usual marching near the main camp, not the rehearsed noise. Something quieter. Columns slipping through trees, shapes where there should be only riverbank darkness. Porus's eyes narrow. He does not panic. He does not dismiss it. He does the only thing a good commander can do when the fog of war thickens. He prepares to act without full certainty. Orders snap out. Riders scatter. A forward force begins to form cavalry, and whatever mobile units can strike fast to investigate, to delay, to kill the crossing attempt before it becomes a landing. Behind them, the heavier body infantry and elephants waits coiled like a fist. Porus must decide whether to move the whole army or hold the bank. If he commits everything upstream and Alexander's main camp crosses elsewhere, Porus loses the river line. If he holds too much back and the upstream crossing succeeds, Alexander lands uncontested and turns the battle into open field war. This is the nightmare Alexander has engineered, a choice made in rain with incomplete information under the pressure of time. Porus looks once more at the river. He can almost feel the enemy on it, oars biting black water horses, shivering in boats, men praying through clenched teeth. Somewhere upstream, the Hydaspes has begun to betray him. And now Porus moves fast, decisive, into the storm toward the sound of history changing. Night march in the monsoon. The storm does not fall like rain. It falls like a decision. Across the flood-swollen Hydaspes, lightning stutters and dies, leaving the world in brief, hard images. Trees bent by wind, the slick shine of mud, the ghostly glare of water, then plunging everything back into darkness. In the Macedonian camp, fires burn low and smoky, their flames fighting for breath beneath the wet sky. Men crouch under cloaks and shields, listening to thunder roll like distant chariots. This is the kind of night that breaks ordinary armies. For Alexander, it is cover. He has spent days teaching Porus to expect noise, teaching him to expect movement that means nothing, teaching him that every alarm is another empty rehearsal. The ancient sources describe the contest along the river as much as a duel of nerve as of spears. Arrian, drawing from earlier accounts, emphasizes the deception and the patience. Curtius paints the weather like a curse. However they tell it, they all circle the same truth. Alexander wins the right to cross by exhausting the enemy's certainty. Tonight, he strikes. The split. The Macedonian army becomes two stories told at once. On the main bank, the visible camp remains alive, with theater fires, maintained patrols displayed. The suggestion of preparation kept deliberately obvious. Officers move where they can be seen. Units shift as if assembling for a grand crossing attempt. Horns and shouted orders flare and fade, never enough to commit, always enough to keep Porus's eyes fixed. But upstream, the real army moves. Alexander chooses it carefully, the men who can march silently through mud and keep their formations under chaos. Cavalry that can punch hard the moment they reach firm ground. Light troops who can scramble up a bank and fight while still dripping river water. The chosen column slips away under the cover of rain, guided by scouts who know the river's moods, its hidden channels, its shallows, the places where the current breaks against islands and spits of land. To the soldiers, it feels like stepping out of the known world. In the main camp, there is warmth of habit fires, tense routine. Upstream, there is only wet darkness, and the sound of water growing louder with every step. Imagine walking in that column. Your sandals sink. Each footfall pulls free with a soft, ugly sound. Your cloak clings to your shoulders like a second skin. Your spear feels heavier than it did an hour ago, as if the storm is adding weight to the wood. You cannot see the man 3 paces ahead unless lightning flares. You judge distance by sound, breathing the faint clink of metal restrained by careful hands, the occasional snort of a horse forced to keep quiet. No one speaks above a whisper. There is a strange intimacy to it, hundreds, thousands moving as one body, held together by discipline and fear. Not fear of Porus alone, but fear of the river. Because even a veteran knows this steel can be fought. Water cannot. The crossing point. At last a column reaches the chosen place. The river here is still wide, still violent, but broken its force, divided by a wooded island, or raised ground, a dark shape in the current that interrupts the flow. On the far side, the bank rises in slick earth and tangled growth. It is not a gentle landing. It is a scrape of survival. Boats wait in shadow, some proper craft brought down from earlier preparations, some lashed together, some improvised with hide coverings stretched tight to keep water out. In ancient accounts, the details vary, but the image is consistent. Alexander does not rely on a single method. He uses whatever can float, because tonight is not about elegance. Tonight is about seconds. Men begin to board. The movement is careful, practiced, urgent. Shields are angled to deflect rain and hide reflections. Horses are coaxed forward with murmured words and firm hands. They hate the water, and everyone knows it. One frightened horse can overturn a boat, and one overturned boat can become a panic that spreads. Alexander is there close enough to be seen when lightning flashes. He does not stand back like a distant king. He places himself where men will look for steadiness. Later traditions love to frame Alexander as a living charm against fear, and whether or not that is exaggeration, the principle holds: soldiers take their courage from what they can see. The first boats slide into the river. The Hydaspes grabs them immediately. Current slams the hulls sideways. Oars bite and skid. Water pours over edges. Men curse under their breath, then clamp their mouths shut. Sound is a signal. Horses tremble hooves, skittering on wet wood. The river is cold enough to shock the lungs. And still the boats push forward because they must. At the same time, a cruel problem emerges, one that every commander fears and every chronicler loves in darkness, and storm navigation becomes a guess. Some boats are pulled off course toward the island. Some drift farther downstream than intended. The crossing that looked clean on a map becomes a scattered, dangerous smear of men and animals fighting water one boat at a time. For an instant, it feels like the river is winning. The first landing. A boat scrapes against mud. Hands shoot out, grabbing roots and branches. Men lunge forward, hauling themselves up the far bank like survivors of a shipwreck. Their boots slip. Their armor drags. Their shields feel like stones. They are not a battle line yet. They are a wet knot of bodies desperate to become a formation before Porus can reach them. Light troops go first, clambering higher, fanning out, weapons ready. Behind them, heavier infantry follows, struggling to keep order. Cavalrymen drag horses up the slope, pulling hard on reins as animals fight the incline and the fear. Then the storm betrays them or saves them. Lightning cracks open the sky, and for a heartbeat the far bank is lit like a stage. In that flash, you can see the scale of the risk-scattered groups, some still at water's edge, some halfway up the bank, some stuck near the island, searching for their own landing point. It is a fragile beginning, exactly the kind of vulnerability Porus designed his defense to exploit. And somewhere in that same flash, far off through rain, you glimpse movement, dark shapes in motion. Riders, scouts. The first response. Porus has seen enough. The first blow. It does not arrive as an elephant charge, not yet. Porus's forward elements come first cavalry and chariots, where the ground allows moving fast to strike the bridgehead before it hardens into an army. You hear them before you see them, the rapid drum of hooves, the distant shout of command, the faint rattle of wheels, if chariots manage to find traction on firmer ground. They are not the full might of Porus's host. They are the blade thrown ahead of the hand. Alexander understands what is happening the moment the first enemy riders appear through the rain. This is the battle. Before the battle, the knife fight in the doorway. If Porus's cavalry can crash into the crossing force while it is still scattered, Alexander's gamble ends here in mud without even reaching the elephants. If Alexander can hold, can stabilize, Porus will be forced to bring the main army away from the riverbank, and once Porus moves, the entire defense shifts from denial to engagement. Alexander does not wait to be struck. He gathers what cavalry has landed and forms a sharp wedge, the kind of formation that has broken Persian lines and shattered Greek ranks. The horses are half mad from water and thunder, but they are trained for impact. Men lock knees, tighten grips, lower spears. Then Alexander drives forward into the rain. The clash is sudden, brutal, intimate. Hooves churn mud into a thick paste. Spears thrust and snap. Swords flash in lightning. A man falls and vanishes into brown water like he never existed. Horses scream a sound that cuts deeper than any human cry. For moments, it is chaos. But Macedonian discipline is a weapon even when drenched. The cavalry strikes as a unit, not as individuals. Light troops harry the flanks. The enemy riders recoil, regroup, probe again. It is not a clean victory. It is a struggle for balance, a contest of who can keep shape when the world is slipping. And through it all, the river behind Alexander keeps delivering more men, dripping, gasping, scrambling up the bank to join the fight. Slowly the bridgehead becomes real. A line forms, not perfect, not complete, but enough. The moment the night changes. Porus's forward force pulls back, not fleeing, but retreating to buy time. Time to bring up elephants. Time to assemble the full weight of the army. Time to crush this intrusion properly. Alexander watches them go, rain streaming off his helmet. He knows what comes next. He has crossed the river, yes, but he has also crossed into the space where Porus's greatest weapons can finally be used. The night has carried him to the far bank. Now the dawn will bring the elephants. And as the first gray hint of morning begins to seep into the storm clouds, Alexander's men look out across the wet plain and feel the ground tremble, not from thunder, but from something heavier, something alive. The false campfire's dawn does not arrive cleanly on the Hydaspes. It seeps in gray and reluctant through torn clouds, revealing a battlefield still half made. Rain continues in sheets. The river behind Alexander's men rages like an open wound, swallowing sound, and spitting it back as roar. And on the far bank, the Macedonian bridgehead is no longer a handful of soaked survivors. It is becoming an army. Men stumble up the slope in clumps, dripping, breathing hard, clutching shields and spears like lifelines. Officers shove them into shape. Light troops fan out to form a screen. Cavalry gathers horses, shaking water from their manes, eyes wild, nostrils flaring at a smell they cannot name, but fear all the same. Elephants. Across the wet plain, Porus's response is moving. But along the river, another drama unfolds, one Porus cannot ignore, because at the main Macedonian camp, the fires still burn. The camp that refuses to vanish downstream where Porus has watched for days, the Macedonian camp behaves as if nothing has changed. Smoke rises. Horns sound, soldiers appear in disciplined clusters, torches move along the bank like nervous stars. If Porus's scouts look from a distance, they see exactly what Alexander wants them to see. A king still here, an army still waiting, a crossing still only a threat, not a reality. This is the second blade of Alexander's plan, the blade that cuts not flesh, but decision. Ancient accounts often stress this deception. Alexander leaves a capable commander behind, with orders to keep the enemy fixed and uncertain, to make the river bank look alive with intent. Writers differ on the precise names and distributions, but the principle is consistent across the tradition. While one part of the Macedonian force crosses upstream, the remainder behaves as if preparing to cross here at any moment. Porus, a cautious and intelligent king, is now forced into an impossible question. Is the upstream crossing the main effort, or a diversion? If Porus moves his whole army away from the river line to crush Alexander's bridgehead, he risks a second crossing nearer the camp, one that could land behind him and turn his defense into a trap. But if he keeps too much strength guarding the main bank, he risks letting the upstream force solidify, become unbreakable. This is what Alexander has purchased with noise and patience, a war of attention. Porus cannot see the truth clearly, so he must act in fragments. Porus throws the knife first. At first light, Porus sends what he can send quickly, cavalry, perhaps some chariots, where the ground allows, and a hard core of troops intended to delay, disrupt, and bleed the bridgehead. They arrive like a probing spear thrust, testing whether Alexander's landing is fragile or firm. The ground fights them. Monsoon rain turns the plain into a slick skin of mud, wheels bog, horses slip, men lose footing at the worst moments in the split second between raising a weapon and striking. Alexander uses that. He orders his screen forward light infantry and archers, forcing Porus's leading riders to hesitate and bunch. Then Macedonian cavalry hits in coordinated bursts, not a single mindless charge, but a rhythm. Strike, pull back, strike again, each impact designed to keep Porus's vanguard off balance and prevent it from finding the bridgehead's soft spots. It is ugly work. Men die without ceremony, swallowed by rain and mud. A rider goes down, and his horse collapses on him, pinning him under weight and panic. A spear thrust lands too deep. The man who receives it makes no grand sound, only a small wet gasp before the storm takes his breath away. Between clashes, Alexander's men drag more troops up the bank, forcing order onto chaos. Sarissas, those long Macedonian pikes, are carried in to place their tips like a field of thorns. The phalanx begins to form not as a perfect parade ground block, but as a living bramble that is harder to enter than to look at. Porus's forward force withdraws again, not broken, but denied the quick kill it came for. And that denial matters, because it buys Alexander the one thing he needed most, time. The bridgehead hardens. Now the crossing becomes a machine. Boat after boat emerges from the storm. Men, horses, supplies each arrival thickens the presence on the far bank. The initial terror of water gives way to grim repetition. Unload climb form, ranks move forward, make space for the next wave. Behind Alexander, the river keeps roaring, an endless reminder that retreat is not easy. If the bridgehead fails, the Hydaspes will not offer a graceful escape. So Alexander does what he always does. He presses forward. He pushes the line outward from the bank, seeking room to deploy fully. The goal is not merely to survive the landing, but to force Porus into open battle on ground where Macedonian coordination and cavalry maneuver can breathe. But Porus is not a man who walks blindly into another's strengths. Porus is bringing his own. The elephant line revealed. The first sign is the tremor. Not thunder, thunder is above indifferent. This tremor is below, answered by the earth itself. It grows steadier, heavier, like drums made of stone. Then through rain and fog shapes rise. Elephants. They appear gradually like a wall forming out of cloud. Some wear armor on forehead and chest. Some carry towers or platforms. Their handlers sit high, goading them forward with voice and hook. Between them, infantry lines begin to assemble, dense, disciplined, shielded. On the wings, cavalry gathers ready to strike where elephants cannot. Porus's formation is not chaos, it is design. Elephants spaced to break the phalanx, infantry to hold the gaps, cavalry to punish flanks, and Porus himself present visible, because a king's courage can keep an army standing when fear starts to bite. Alexander sees the shape of it and understands at once Porus intends to do what the riverbank defense promised, crush him with elephants the moment he is forced into tight ground. So Alexander's counter is equally clear. He will not throw his men into the elephants head-on if he can avoid it. He will try to win the wings break. Porus's cavalry isolate the elephants and then dismantle the center piece by piece. This is not a battle of brute strength. It is a battle of sequencing. And as the two armies stare across the wet plain, the storm briefly eases just enough for sounds to carry. You hear Macedonian officers shouting to dress ranks. You hear Porus's horns calling units into place. You hear elephants rumbling a low sound like distant rockfall. Then the rain returns harder. A choice, sealed in smoke. Back downriver, the false campfires still burn. The deception still holds Porus's caution like a hand on his throat. He cannot fully abandon the riverline, not with those flames and movements suggesting another crossing at any moment. So Porus commits to the most dangerous compromise in war. He commits enough to crush Alexander here, but not so much that he risks the rest. It is the kind of decision that can be praised as prudence or cursed as hesitation, depending on who survives to tell the story. And the storm gives no verdict. It only watches. On the far bank, Alexander rides along the forming line. He does not shout grand speeches into rain. He gives sharp commands, practical, urgent. He points at ground, at angles, at gaps. He is building a battlefield in real time, shaping where men will die. Across from him, Porus holds steady. He lets Alexander see the elephants, lets him feel the weight of them, because fear is also a weapon, and Porus knows the value of letting an enemy contemplate the worst. For a long moment, neither side moves. Only rain moves. Only the river moves. Only elephants sway impatient. Then Porus raises an arm. The elephant line begins to advance, and every Macedonian horse along the front shifts backward, eyes-wide hooves scrabbling as if the animals themselves recognize a truth the men are trying to deny. Some enemies cannot be fought the way you have always fought. Crossing at the island, the Hydaspes keeps no memory of courage. It swallows the brave and the fearful alike, dragging at ankles, ripping at hulls, laughing in its own language of current and stone. Even now, after Alexander's first landing has hardened into something like a line, the river remains a second enemy at his back, a roaring reminder that the battle is not only ahead, but behind. Because the crossing is not finished, not even close. Out on the water, boats still fight to reach the far bank. Some come in clean oars, biting in rhythm, men hunched low under shields to keep rain from blinding them. Others drift sideways, spun by the current arriving too far downstream, or scraping against the island's slick edge. And every time a boat touches mud, the same brutal cycle begins. Unload, climb form, move, before the next wave arrives with the same half-drowned desperation in their eyes. The island, dark wooded, half-submerged, sights in the middle of this chaos like a witness. It splits the current, making one channel slightly calmer, the other more violent, both treacherous. In lightning flashes, men appear there like ghosts, clinging to branches, dragging craft into alignment, hauling horses that kick and squeal in fear. This is what conquest looks like in the Monsoon, not banners in triumph, but soaked men gritting their teeth through cold water, trying not to die before the enemy even reaches them. The enemy in the water. The most terrifying moment of a river crossing is not the launch, it is the middle. That place where you are neither shore nor safety, where the river has you and the enemy watches, and your armor becomes a promise of drowning if the boat tilts. A craft lurches, water slaps over the side. Men instinctively shift their weight, and that instinct nearly kills them. The boat tips harder, a horse rears hooves, striking wet wood, and suddenly the world becomes all hands and panic. One man falls in. He vanishes with a single splash. His comrades reach for him, fingers scraping air. The river takes him as if it has been waiting. Armor drags him down. He does not scream long enough to be remembered. Another boat collides with a hidden snagwood or stone beneath the surface and shudders to a stop. The current begins to spin it slow at first, then faster. Oars thrash. Men shout before they can stop themselves. Sound carries across water. On the far bank, Porus's forward screen hears it. Scouts see movement. Riders turn their horses and vanish into rain, carrying the news to the king who is already marching. Alexander knows the risk of every lost minute. He knows that a bridgehead is not a victory. It is a wound in the enemy's defense that must be widened before it can close. So he drives his men outward, expanding the space behind the front line, so new arrivals have somewhere to form, somewhere to breathe. But Porus is approaching with elephants, and elephants change what space means. The first sight of the wall. As the rain briefly thins, Alexander's men see them more clearly. A line of elephants advances through fog like a moving cliff. Their feet sink into mud, then rise again with slow inevitability. Their shoulders roll like siege engines. Their trunks lift and curl, tasting scent. Some wear armor that glistens darkly, some bear platforms. Some are bare except for the scars of training and war. Between them Porus's infantry assembles, dense ranks, shields up, spears angled forward. On the wings, cavalry gathers riders in disciplined clusters, ready to exploit any disorder the elephants create. The Macedonians have faced many terrors, Persian arrows that turned sunlight into buzzing death, the walls of Tyre that refused surrender, the mountains that ambush you with altitude and cold. But an elephant line is a different kind of dread. It is fear that moves. Horses smell it and begin to back away. Some snort, some scream, some rear. Riders fight their mounts, whispering and cursing, pressing heels into trembling flanks. Alexander rides along the front, reading the truth in the animal's eyes. He knows that if cavalry collapses in fear, the whole plan collapses with it. The phalanx can hold against men, even against cavalry, but elephants can rupture it, create gaps that cavalry can exploit. So he gives orders that feel almost sacrilegious to soldiers trained in one doctrine: do not fight the elephants like you fight men. He pulls some cavalry slightly back enough to keep them from being the first crushed by panic. He pushes light troops forward, skirmishers, archers, javelin men, those who can move quickly, and aim at the soft parts of a giant. And behind them, the Sarissa phalanx tightens like a hedge of iron. The Macedonian line is becoming a trap of its own, designed to hold long enough for tactics to bite. But none of it matters if the river cannot deliver the rest of the army. The island fight. At the island, men are now fighting not Porus, but time. Boats jam up. Some land too soon caught on the island's edge. Supplies spill. Horses kick free, nearly dragging handlers into the water. Officers shout themselves hoarse, trying to force order into a place where order feels impossible. A sudden surge in the current slams two boats together, wood cracks. A shield tumbles overboard and spins away. A man jumps after it by reflex and almost drowns for a piece of painted leather. Then upstream a boat arrives with more cavalry, valuable, desperate, needed. Its landing is messy. The horses balk at the mud bank, refusing to climb. Men drag them by reins, striking their haunches, pleading, cursing. The animals finally surge upward, hooves scraping bodies, heaving, and for a moment the bank becomes a tangle of limbs, foam, and fear. Alexander's officers form them as soon as they're up there. There, face forward, tighten, move. Because now the enemy is no longer a rumor in the rain. Now, Porus's forward elements are close enough to strike again, and Porus's main body is close enough to make the next strike final. The bridgehead breathes. Barely. Finally, the crossing reaches a threshold. The far bank holds enough Macedonians to look like a true army. The phalanx is more complete. The cavalry has more weight. The skirmishers spread in a thin veil. Supplies and spare weapons accumulate behind the line, piled like offerings to survival. Alexander's men can breathe, if only for a heartbeat. But that heartbeat is when Porus chooses to close his fist. The elephant line advances another measure. The tremor underfoot grows stronger. You can feel it through mud and boot leather. The sound is not a roar, but a low, continuous rumble, like the earth's own warning. Alexander's front rank watches the beasts approach and understands suddenly that the battle will not be decided by who is braver. It will be decided by who adapts faster. A first elephant lifts its head, ears fanning, trunk curling. A handler leans forward, prodding. The beast steps into the killing distance. Somewhere along the Macedonian line, a horse breaks, wrenching free, bolting backward, in blind terror, nearly trampling a soldier. Men shout, trying to contain it. Discipline strains. Alexander's eyes narrow. He turns to a commander at his side and points not at the elephant's armored head, not at its tusks, but higher. At the men his gesture says, at the handlers, at the control, because the elephants are mighty, but they are not gods, and anything that can be controlled by a man can be disrupted by another man. The sky cracks with thunder again. Rain lashes harder as if the storm itself cannot bear to watch what is coming. The river behind Alexander continues to roar, but it is no longer the loudest thing. The loudest thing is the sound of elephants closing. First clash in the mud. The battlefield is a plain of waterlogged earth and open space that should favor speed cavalry and the clean geometry of formations. But the monsoon has rewritten the rules. Mud clings to sandals and hooves like a curse. Wheels sink. Men slip at the worst moments, mid-stride, mid-thrust, turning a disciplined advance into a stagger. And still both kings commit. Across the wet ground, Porus's army settles into a shape that is not improvised, but deliberate. Ancient narrators, Arian most of all, echoing the accounts he trusted, describe Porus drawing up with elephants spaced along the front infantry, filling the gaps cavalry on the wings, and chariots where they can function. The logic is brutal, Elephants break the enemy's coherence. Infantry holds and kills. Cavalry strikes the flanks of whatever remains. Alexander, facing that living wall, answers with his own kind of order. He is not reckless here. Not tonight. Not after the river has already demanded blood. He rides the line and makes the battle a sequence. First win the wings. If Porus's cavalry is broken or forced away, the elephants become isolated, terrifying, yes, but harder to support and easier to trap. Second, pin the center. Let the phalanx hold, absorb, and deny breakthroughs. Third, dismantle the elephants, not by charging them in a frenzy, but by bleeding their control drivers' eyes trunks until terror turns into confusion. It is the plan of a commander who understands that monsters are beaten by systems. The lines take shape. The Macedonian center tightens. Sarissas tilt forward a forest of long pikes, angled like winter branches, heavy with rain. Men shoulder close shields overlapping. Behind them, officers move like seamstresses, stitching gaps shut with shouted orders and blunt hands. On the flanks, cavalry forms companions and allied horse-armored riders whose entire purpose is to hit like a hammer. But you can see the tension in the animals. The horses keep turning their heads toward the elephant's nostrils, wide ears flicking. A horse does not need philosophy to understand scale. Light troops spread in front, and between archers and javelin men, the fast, the nimble, the ones who can run in mud and still throw true. Their job is to make Porus pay for every step forward, to irritate and provoke, to pierce the illusion that the elephant line is untouchable. Across from them, Porus's front looks immovable. Elephants sway and stamp. Infantry holds tight, men standing in ranks. Shields set spears steady. On the wings, Porus's cavalry begins to shift forward, probing, searching for weakness. The chariots, proud weapons on firm ground, struggle for clean footing, but they remain part of the threat, especially if they can catch men mid-maneuver. The space between the armies shrinks. Rain drifts sideways. Lightning flashes. For a heartbeat, both lines are perfectly visible, two worlds poised to collide. Then the first contact comes, not from the elephants, but from the wings. The cavalry strikes. First, Porus's cavalry moves like a blade, aiming to cut Alexander's flanks before the center can fully engage. If Porus can disrupt the Macedonian horse, he can prevent Alexander from executing the hammer stroke that has won so many battles. Without that cavalry pressure, Alexander's phalanx becomes a wall that can be battered especially by elephants until it cracks. Alexander anticipates it. He orders his own cavalry into motion fast enough to meet the threat, controlled enough not to be drawn into chaos. The first clash is a shock of sound, hooves churning mud into spray spear points, clacking against shields, shouted commands, swallowed by wind. A rider lunges, misses, and nearly falls as his horse slips. Another rider's spear strikes home, and the man hit does not fall cleanly. He pitches sideways, dragging the spear with him, wrenching it from the attacker's hands. For a moment, two horses collide chest-to-chest eyes, rolling both animals trying to decide whether to bite or flee. The cavalry fight in rain is not glorious. It is desperate geometry. Alexander's horsemen seek angles. They feint and wheel, trying to avoid getting pinned in mud, where elephants could later catch them. Porus's riders press forward with stubborn courage, trying to force contact and hold it to keep Alexander's cavalry locked in place. The battle becomes a series of small, violent moments. A cluster of Macedonian riders punches through a pocket, slicing a thin gap, then must turn immediately before infantry spears find them. Porus's cavalry surges toward a flank, only to be met by a volley of javelins that forces them to recoil and bunch. A Macedonian officer is unhorsed and vanishes into the mud. Two men drag him up by his arms before hooves finish him. All the while Alexander watches for the tell, not the bravest act, not the loudest charge. The rhythm, the point when Porus's cavalry begins to tire, when cohesion loosens, when the line stops moving like a unit and starts moving like individuals. The center advances like a tide. As the wings clash, Porus's infantry begins to step forward between the elephants. This is the moment that chills the Macedonian line because it signals Porus's confidence. He is not waiting to see how cavalry fares. He is committing the whole machine. Elephants advance in measured intervals, handlers urging them on. Infantry follows in the gaps using the elephant bodies as moving shields. Alexander orders his phalanx to hold, not to rush forward into the elephant's reach. Sarissas lock, shields brace. The center becomes a disciplined refusal. Light troops dart out throwing missiles toward the elephants' faces, and the men atop them. Most strikes glance off armor or vanish into thick hide. But a few land where they matter. A driver flinches. An elephant shakes its head. A handler leans back momentarily uncertain. Small effects, yes. But in battle, small effects accumulate like cracks in stone. The distance closes again. Now the Macedonian front can hear the elephants clearly, heavy, breathing the wet slap of feet in mud, the low rumble from deep in their chests. It is not a roar of anger. It is the sound of weight. Some Macedonian horses begin to balk. Riders fight them, gripping reins tight, whispering into twitching ears. One horse rears, front legs pawing the air, nearly throwing its rider. The rider hauls it down, jaw-clenched eyes fixed forward, as if staring at the elephants will keep fear from rising. Alexander senses the danger at once if the cavalry's nerve breaks Porus's system wins before the decisive clash even arrives. So he does something subtle but crucial. He keeps his cavalry moving, not in a reckless charge toward elephants, but in controlled arcs, constant motion, preventing the horses from standing still long enough to panic fully. Motion becomes discipline. Discipline becomes survival. The first turning point. The cavalry fight on the flank reaches a brutal peak. Alexander commits a stronger push. His riders strike Porus's horse with a coordinated surge, supported by missiles and pressure from light troops. Porus's cavalry yields, ground not routed, but forced back, forced to give space. And in that forced space, Alexander sees the battlefield opening like a wound. If he can keep Porus's cavalry occupied, pinned, pressured, unable to swing around, then Porus's elephants will have to fight without the clean support that makes them truly devastating. But Porus is not blind. He raises his signals. His infantry tightens. His elephants continue forward now close enough that the Macedonian front rank can see water streaming from their hides, see mud packed around their feet, see the gleam of tusks. The plain trembles. The first elephant reaches the edge of the Macedonian killing distance, and the entire battlefield seems to inhale men, horses, kings, holding breath for the moment when living towers meet the iron forest of the phalanx. Elephants in the storm. The first elephant hits like an earthquake given flesh. It does not charge with the neat speed of cavalry or the disciplined push of infantry. It arrives a mass of muscle and breath, a living wall that does not understand the idea of stopping. Its feet sink into the mud, rise and sink again each step, shaking water from the ground as if the earth itself is sweating fear. The Macedonian front rank sees it close now, close enough to smell it, a heavy animal musk, wet hide. the sharp edge of iron fittings and leather straps, the sour tang of fear from horses that can no longer lie to themselves. The handlers are there too perched high, men with hooks and goads and voices trained to command a beast that could kill them with a careless flick of its head. Some elephants wear armor on the forehead and chest. Some have bands around tusks. Some carry platforms that make them look like moving fortresses. And between the elephants, Porus's infantry advances in steady rhythm, shields up spears, angled men who know that the elephants' true power is not only the bodies they crush, but the formations they break. Alexander watches the moment the elephants commit, and he understands what this really is. Not a test of courage, a test of cohesion under terror. When horses lose their minds, cavalry horses do not reason, they do not think in strategy. They smell the elephant line and feel the vibration under their hooves and decide instinctively that the world has become unsafe. One horse bolts backward, ripping its reins from its rider's grasp. Another rears, screaming, front legs pawing at the air. Riders curse and cling and try to force their mounts into obedience, but fear is contagious among animals. One panic sparks another, spreading along the line like fire through dry grass. Alexander has anticipated this. He has kept his cavalry in motion, in controlled arcs, avoiding the dead stillness where panic grows roots. Now he pushes the horsemen slightly farther out away from the elephants' immediate presence, using them not as a wall in front of the beasts, but as a weapon to strike Porus's flanks when the moment comes. Because right now the center must hold. The phalanx lowers its sarissas and braces. The long pikes form an iron thicket, points angled toward flesh and eyes. Shields lock, men press shoulder to shoulder. Rain runs down helmets and into mouths. Mud sucks at ankles. The line tightens until it is less an army than a single stubborn object. The elephant reaches the sarissa tips. For an instant, time slows. Then the beast pushes forward anyway. The sarissas jab and scrape against armored forehead plates. Some pike points pierce the softer flesh around the trunk or the mouth. The elephant trumpets a sound that blasts through rein and bone and swings its trunk like a whip slamming into pikes and men. A soldier is lifted, thrown lands badly, disappears under hooves before he can even scream. The elephant's handler leans forward shouting. The beast surges. The phalanx begins to bend, not because the men are weak, but because no human line is designed to absorb the weight of a moving tower. The center begins to break, and then it doesn't. This is Porus's moment. Elephants are not merely meant to kill, they are meant to create openings. When an elephant pushes into a line, the soldiers nearest it are forced to step aside to avoid being trampled. That sideways motion creates gaps. Gaps invite spears. Gaps invite cavalry. Gaps become collapse. Porus's infantry surges behind the elephant intervals, spears thrusting into any space that appears. In the rain-smeared chaos you see flashes of violence, a spear going into a man's throat, a shield splitting, a soldier clawing at mud as he tries to crawl away from elephant feet. The Macedonian line shudders. And for a heartbeat, it looks like Porus has done it, like the iron forest will crack under living weight. Then Alexander's system bites back. Light troops rush forward not toward the elephant's armored head, but toward the men above. Javelins arc through rain, arrows hiss, stones fly from slings. The targets are small handlers perched on moving giants swaying, shouting, but the point is not perfect accuracy. The point is disruption. A handler flinches, a driver leans away, a goad misses its mark. The elephant hesitates just half a heartbeat. Half a heartbeat is enough. Macedonian infantry steps in, stabbing upward at trunks, at eyes, at the soft places behind the ear. Men who would never dream of fighting an elephant alone do it now as a pack, because packs survive what individuals cannot. The elephant trumpets again, louder, more frantic. It shakes its head, trying to clear pain and confusion. The handler strikes harder. The beast lurches forward, and then something breaks. Not the elephant's strength, its control. The beast swings sideways, colliding with the elephant next to it. The second elephant reacts, startled, shifting its weight. The spacing that Porus has carefully arranged begins to deform the neat intervals, becoming irregular as beasts jostle and stumble in mud. It is not a rout, not yet. But the elephant line has lost its perfection. And in battle, perfection is everything. The battlefield becomes a labyrinth. Now the plain is no longer a clean face-off between two armies. It becomes a maze. Elephants push into the phalanx, and the phalanx absorbs them like a bristling wall, bending and reforming. Infantry fights in the gaps, hacking and thrusting in cramped spaces where long pikes are awkward and shields become lifelines. Some elephants begin to panic. An elephant that panics is not simply dangerous to the enemy, it is dangerous to everyone. A wounded beast rears and spins. Its trunk flails, striking men on both sides. It stomps backward into Porus's own infantry, crushing shields and scattering soldiers who were meant to be protected by it. A handler clings desperately, trying to regain control, shouting commands that the elephant no longer hears. Rain and mud amplify the chaos. Men slip while trying to stab. Horses recoil. Chariots already struggling become liabilities, their wheels bogging their teams, snarled in the churned earth. In the center, Porus's infantry tries to maintain pressure, pushing forward behind the elephants, but the ground and the beasts are working against clean coordination. Every time an elephant shifts unexpectedly, Porus's men must adjust, and adjustment under fire is where formations die. Alexander sees the opportunity emerging like a crack in stone. If he can keep the elephant line disordered, keep the beasts turning into obstacles rather than weapons, then the center becomes something Porus cannot control. And if the center becomes uncontrollable, Porus's cavalry must intervene to stabilize it, which is exactly what Alexander has been waiting for. A king watches men become dust. Porus is not far behind his line. He can see the struggle clearly. He can see elephants bleeding from a dozen small wounds, their hides pierce their eyes wild. He can see his infantry grappling with the Macedonian hedge, fighting for inches of ground. He can also see something else, a truth that no commander can ignore. The elephants are doing what they were meant to do, but they are also consuming his battle plan. They are turning the center into a storm of their own, a place where control is fragile, and every mistake can be fatal. Porus signals again, adjusting shifting troops, trying to keep the intervals intact. He is fighting not only Alexander's men, but the physics of animals in mud. Alexander rides on the flank, watching the elephant chaos grow. He does not smile. There is no joy in this. He has seen too many men die to find joy in blood. But he recognizes the shape of inevitability when it forms. The elephant line is still terrifying, but it is no longer clean, and a battle is often won the moment the enemy's weapon becomes a problem the enemy must solve. The storm rages on, the river roars behind them, and in the mud between two kings, elephants trumpet half war cry, half scream, while Alexander's cavalry begins to move, searching for the opening that will turn chaos into collapse. The cavalry scythe. In the midst of the elephant storm, a quieter danger creeps across the battlefield: fatigue. Not the slow tiredness of a long march, but the sharp, draining exhaustion of men fighting mud, rain, and terror all at once. Every step pulls at legs. Every breath tastes of wet leather. Every shout is swallowed by wind, and beneath it all the ground trembles sometimes from elephant feet, sometimes from cavalry surges, sometimes from the simple fact that thousands of bodies are moving and dying on the same soaked plain. This is the moment Alexander has been building toward, because elephants can break formations. But cavalry can end battles. The old sources describe Alexander as constantly seeking the decisive angle, the point where pressure becomes rupture. In Arrian's telling, the Macedonian king does not gamble blindly. He probes, he tests. He waits for the enemy's alignment to shift, then strikes with speed that feels like inevitability. Tonight, under Monsoon cloud, he is doing the same thing, only now the battlefield is louder, uglier, and closer to disaster. The elephant line has lost its clean spacing. Some beasts are wounded and irritated, some have been forced to veer, some are still pushing forward, but without the perfect coordination Porus intended. Infantry in the gaps is fighting desperately to keep cohesion. Porus's cavalry on the wings is trying to find openings, but the center is demanding attention because a collapsing center drags everything down with it. Alexander sees Porus's dilemma in real time, so he takes a blade to it. The hammer begins to swing. The Macedonian cavalry does not charge in one massive wave. That would be foolish in mud, and Alexander is not here to be foolish. Instead, he begins with pressure-controlled arcs on the flank feints that threaten Porus's cavalry and force them to respond. Each movement is meant to provoke, to pull Porus's horsemen away from where they want to be and toward where Alexander needs them. A small unit rides forward, hard spear points low, then turns away at the last moment, forcing Porus's riders to wheel and chase, only to meet javelins from Macedonian light troops who have been placed precisely for this purpose. The javelins do not need to kill in great numbers. They need to sting, to disrupt, to make men hesitate. Porus's cavalry answers quick, proud, dangerous. They surge out, trying to catch Alexander's riders, while they turn in mud, trying to lock them in contact, trying to deny them space. But Alexander keeps moving. He refuses to be pinned. He uses his cavalry like a scythe, sweeping wide, always in motion, always threatening, always cutting at the edge of Porus's control. And slowly, Porus's riders begin to do what Alexander wants. They begin to stretch. A cavalry line stretched too far is a cavalry line that cannot reinforce quickly. It is a line that becomes a series of clusters, brave clusters, dangerous clusters, but no longer a single tool. Alexander watches for the moment those clusters stop supporting each other. The flank buckles. It happens in a place that looks ordinary, not at the center where elephants scream, not in the most dramatic clash. It happens on the wing where rain hides small disasters. Porus's cavalry commits to a push against the Macedonian flank. They come in hard, trying to ride down light troops and force Macedonian horse into a defensive knot. The ground is terrible. Horses slip. Men lean low to keep balanced spears angled. Alexander lets them come. Then he hits them from two directions. One Macedonian cavalry group slams their front controlled tight. Another rides into their side, not in a full-speed gallop impossible in this mud, but in a heavy, relentless shove of horseflesh and iron. Porus's riders are squeezed. Their formation stutters. A few horses collide. A spear thrust lands, and a man drops. Another man tries to fill the gap and is struck in the face by a flying clod of mud kicked up by hooves, blinding him at the worst moment. He sways. A Macedonian spear takes him. Then the line breaks just a little. but enough. A small pocket opens a gap where Porus's cavalry is no longer shoulder to shoulder. Macedonian riders surge into it, instinctively exploiting it, the way water exploits a crack in stone. Porus's cavalry tries to close the pocket, but the effort costs them. They bunch up. They lose momentum. They begin to wheel and counterwheel, chasing ghosts in rain. Alexander's men do not chase ghosts. They chase geometry, and geometry says this flank is weakening. Porus's counter. The king holds his nerve. Porus is not fooled into panic. Not yet. He signals. He shifts cavalry reserves. He tries to restitch the wing. His infantry presses harder behind the elephants, attempting to force the Macedonian center to break before his cavalry collapses. Because Porus understands something vital. If the Macedonian center cracks under elephants, Alexander's cavalry victory on the wing becomes irrelevant. So Porus doubles down on the center pressure. Elephants push again. Infantry surges behind them, spears stabbing into any gap. The phalanx bends under the weight and reforms pikes stabbing upward shields, locking tighter men, grunting with the strain of holding their ground while the world shakes. In the center, Alexander's light troops keep targeting handlers. They harry, they stab, they throw. One handler is struck and falls from an elephant's neck, disappearing beneath trampling feet. The elephant suddenly, without guidance, lurches sideways, trumpeting in confusion, pushing into another beast. The elephant line grows messier. Porus's infantry is forced to adjust again, stepping aside to avoid being crushed by their own weapon. Some men fall and are trampled by their comrades in retreat. Others regain footing and surge forward, faces twisted in fury and fear. The center is turning into a grinding mill, and that grinding is precisely what Alexander wants, because while Porus is forced to manage chaos in the center, Alexander is free to sculpt the decisive blow on the flank. The scythe finds the neck. Alexander commits more cavalry. Not all at once, never all at once, but enough to turn pressure into a breaking point. His riders sweep wider now, threatening to ride behind Porus's line. Porus's cavalry cannot allow that. If Macedonians get behind, they can attack from the rear, split the formation, and turn elephants into trapped beasts among their own men. So Porus's riders move to stop it. They move fast. They move tired. And in doing so, they expose the truth of fatigue. A man who has fought hard in mud cannot pivot as sharply, cannot sustain speed, cannot keep perfect spacing. The line becomes ragged. A few riders push too far ahead. A few lag behind. Alexander seizes that raggedness. He drives a wedge through it. The Macedonian cavalry strikes with coordination that feels like a machine. Front ranks, thrust rear ranks, follow light troops, throw into the flanks. Porus's riders are forced back, then sideways, then back again, each step a loss of ground that becomes a loss of confidence. The wing begins to fold, not in a dramatic rout, not in a sudden stampede, but in the slow, dreadful way a door gives under repeated blows. Porus's cavalry withdraws toward the center, trying to regroup where elephants and infantry might shield them. And that movement, the retreat of the cavalry toward the center, creates the very situation Porus wanted to avoid: crowding. In the elephant chaos, crowding is death. The battlefield tilts. Now the field begins to tilt toward Alexander's design. Porus's cavalry is pressed inward. The elephant line is disordered. Infantry is fighting hard, but losing the clean structure that turns bravery into victory. The Macedonian phalanx, battered and bleeding, still holds. Alexander's cavalry, still mobile, still controlled, begins to threaten encirclement, an invisible noose tightening around Porus's formation. Porus, watching this, understands the danger. His greatest weapon, the elephant has become a double-edged blade. It has broken the Macedonian line in places, yes, but it has also shattered his own ability to maneuver cleanly. Now he must choose pull back to restore order or push forward in the hope that sheer force will break Alexander before the noose tightens. Kings have died on smaller choices. The rain falls harder, as if the sky itself is urging the battle toward climax. In the center, elephants scream again, some in rage, some in pain, some in panic, and the sound carries across the plain like a signal from the underworld. Alexander raises his hand. The cavalry scythe has cut deep. Now he looks for the final stroke. Porus unbroken. By now the battlefield has lost its clean edges. There is no single front anymore, only zones of pressure and panic pockets of men clinging to formation, and the muddy corridors where elephants and cavalry have churned the earth into a grave. The rain keeps falling as if it wants to erase everything, but it cannot erase the sound spears, striking shields, horses screaming elephants, trumpeting men shouting names that the storm will not remember. In the center, the Macedonian phalanx is battered but still alive, its long sarissas bent, snapped slick with rain and blood. The line has warped around elephants like a thorn hedge, forced to bend around boulders. In the wings, Alexander's cavalry has begun to press Porus inward, cutting away the space that makes an army breathe. And yet Porus does not break, not the king, not the core of the men around him. He remains visible behind his line, the steady presence that keeps panic from becoming collapse. Ancient writers later seize on this image because it is rare a monarch who does not vanish into safety, who does not flee at the first sign of danger. Some claim he was tall and imposing. Some claim he fought from an elephant like a moving throne. What matters is less the height of the man and more the weight of his stillness. On a battlefield where everything is sliding, Porus becomes the one thing that holds. The king as anchor. Porus understands what Alexander understands. Morale is not abstract. It is physical. A man fights differently when he believes his king is watching. A soldier holds a line longer when he can see a standard still upright, a commander still mounted, a figure of authority refusing to yield. So Porus does not hide behind the elephants as if they are merely shields. He uses them as symbols, proof that he has brought the full might of his kingdom to the river, and will not surrender it. When his cavalry begins to fold under Alexander's scything pressure, Porus signals and shifts. He does not panic and chase the flank with his whole army. He tries to stabilize the wing with reserve movement, reinforcing where he must without opening himself to a second disaster. When elephants begin to lose control, drivers struck, beasts wounded. Porus tightens the infantry in the gaps, trying to keep his center from becoming a labyrinth that traps his own men. Every decision is made under the worst conditions, rain mud, and a battlefield too loud for clean communication. Orders are relayed by horn by rider, by shouted command, passed hand to hand. A single misheard signal can undo an hour of effort. And still, Porus holds. The human cost behind the myth. The sources speak of strategy formations, turning points. They do not always dwell on what it feels like for an ordinary man to die in the elephant shadows. But the battlefield forces the truth into every moment. A Macedonian soldier tries to stab upward at an elephant's trunk. The trunk slams sideways, breaking his jaw. He falls into mud, choking eyes, wide hands pawing at nothing. A second later, an infantryman from Porus's line thrusts a spear down into his chest, not with hatred, but with the grim efficiency of someone who cannot afford mercy. A Porus infantryman is caught beneath a panicked elephant retreating backward. He raises his shield instinctively. The shield splinters like kindling. His body folds. The elephant does not even notice. A cavalry rider, Macedonian or Indian, it no longer matters, slides from his horse in mud, trapped under the animal's weight. He looks up and sees a boot coming down, then another. Then the world becomes only darkness and rain. This is what empire is built on, thousands of private endings that no chronicler can record. And in the center of those endings, Porus remains unbroken, refusing to make his people's sacrifice meaningless by running. Alexander sees a mirror. Alexander is not a stranger to courage in enemies. He has seen Greek coalitions fight desperately to preserve their pride. He has seen Persians die for a king who fled. He has fought men who were brave and men who were merely trapped. Porus is something else. Porus fights like a ruler defending a world. And Alexander, watching him, feels something he rarely feels in war recognition, not friendship, not softness, but a cold respect for a man who meets invasion without flinching. It is why this battle will echo in memory, not because Alexander defeated another nameless opponent, but because he met a king who made victory expensive. Arrian and later writers emphasize that Alexander's victory at Hydaspes was costly, one of the hardest fights of the campaign. Part of that cost is tactical elephants' weather river crossing, but part of it is Porus himself, the stubborn human core that refuses to collapse simply because logic says it should. The battle tightens like a noose. Alexander's cavalry pressure continues. The wings are not yet a rout, but they are compressed. Porus's horsemen are pushed inward, forced closer to the elephant chaos center. The more they are pressed inward, the more crowded the battlefield becomes, and crowding around elephants is like crowding around fire. Macedonian light troops keep their cruel work aiming at handlers, goading elephants into confusion. Every time a handler falls or flinches, an elephant's movement becomes less predictable. Less predictable means more dangerous. More dangerous means more disorder. Porus's infantry tries to keep the gaps tight, but now they are fighting in a place where their own elephants sometimes lurch sideways, where the neat intervals that once made the line strong have become irregular and dangerous. Meanwhile, the Macedonian phalanx, bleeding, tired, holds just enough. They do not need to win quickly. They need to endure. Because endurance is what allows Alexander's cavalry to finish the job. The battle is beginning to look like a trap closing, a wound and a choice. Somewhere near the center, amid the elephant rumble and spear work, Porus is wounded. A missile, perhaps. A spear glance. The exact detail differs across tellings, but the effect is the same blood on a king visible enough to matter. His guard tightens around him. Men shout. For a moment the battlefield seems to hesitate, because when a king bleeds, an army feels the sting. Porus steadies himself. He does not retreat. He signals again, commanding his men to hold, commanding the elephants to press, commanding cavalry to regroup. It is not madness, it is necessity, because Porus can feel the noose. If he withdraws now, the retreat becomes chaos under cavalry pressure. If he holds too long, Alexander's encirclement becomes complete. The only path left is to force a decisive moment, to break Alexander's center, to scatter his cavalry, to create breathing room before the battlefield collapses inward. So Porus doubles down. Elephants push again. Infantry surges. The Macedonian line buckles, then braces. And Alexander, seeing Porus commit, sees the moment approaching where one mistake, one gap opened at the wrong time, will decide everything. The storm keeps falling. The river keeps roaring. and two kings, one chasing the edge of the world, the other defending his stand on the brink of the battle's fatal turning. The fatal turning. There is a moment in every great battle when the outcome stops being possible and becomes inevitable. It does not always look dramatic in the instant it happens. Sometimes it is only a gap, only a misstep, only a unit arriving a breath too late. But from that moment onward, everything that follows is merely the battlefield acting out a decision that has already been made. At the Hydaspes, that moment arrives not with a shout, but with a shape. A seam opens in Porus's line, small, at first almost invisible, beneath rain and confusion created by the very forces meant to keep it strong. Elephants, mud, crowding, fatigue. And Alexander sees it the way a hunter sees a wounded animal's stumble. The battlefield's cruel geometry. Porus's center is now a labyrinth. The elephants, wounded and harried, no longer maintain perfect intervals. Some have drifted forward too far, some have been forced sideways by pain, some have panicked and moved backward into their own infantry. The infantry, trying to keep pressure on the phalanx, must constantly adjust to avoid being crushed by their own beasts. Every adjustment creates irregularity, and irregularity is where disciplined enemies thrive. On the wings, Porus's cavalry has been pressed inward by Alexander's scything maneuvers. They have not fled, but they have been forced closer to the center to avoid encirclement. That compression means less space, fewer clean angles, and more bodies crowded into elephant territory. It is the worst possible arrangement. Elephants need space to maneuver. Cavalry needs space to accelerate and pivot. Infantry needs space to hold formation. Porus's army is losing space in every direction. Alexander's army, battered but cohesive, is winning it. The Macedonian phalanx, though bruised, remains the anvil. It holds the elephant pressure bending, reforming stabbing with sarissas and shorter spears where pikes snap. Light troops keep bleeding the elephant's control, targeting handlers, and soft points turning the beasts from weapons into problems. And while Porus's center strains to remain coherent, Alexander's cavalry remains the hammer, still mobile, still coordinated, still capable of choosing the moment of impact. The rain keeps falling, turning the entire plain into a slipping board. And then Porus makes the move that opens the seam. The mistimed shift. Porus tries to stabilize the wing. He signals for cavalry to swing and reinforce to prevent Alexander from riding behind the line. It is a sensible decision. It is what any commander would do under threat of encirclement, but it is made under monsoon conditions. Orders take time to travel. Riders slip. Horn calls can be misread. Units move in mud slower than intent. And while Porus's cavalry attempts to reposition the elephant line, continues to churn forward and sideways, unpredictable and loud. For a brief window, the cavalry on one wing becomes separated, pulled away from its infantry support, leaving a pocket where the line is thinner, not empty but vulnerable. At the same time, one elephant, wounded, irritated, half-panicked, lurches sideways into the gap where infantry should have been tight. Porus's infantry recoils to avoid being trampled. That recoil widens the space, and suddenly there it is, a gap large enough for a wedge, a gap large enough for Alexander. Alexander commits. This is where Alexander becomes what his enemies fear most, a man who recognizes opportunity instantly and is willing to throw his weight into it without hesitation. He signals. Reserve cavalry, held back precisely for this kind of moment, surges forward. Not in a wild gallop, mud forbids that, but in a disciplined, accelerating push, horses straining riders, leaning low spear points, angled. Simultaneously, Macedonian light troops intensify their fire, not at random, but aim to amplify confusion in the gap. Handlers exposed infantry horses trying to reform. And the phalanx, sensing the shift, presses, not by charging forward recklessly into elephant feet, but by tightening its line and pushing into the weakened sector, forcing Porus's infantry to fight while stepping backward in mud, one of the most dangerous actions a foot soldier can attempt. Porus sees the threat. He signals for reinforcement, but now the battlefield is moving too fast for him to slow it. Alexander's wedge enters the gap like an iron nail. Porus's infantry attempts to close around it, but the elephants, now disordered, make clean closure impossible. Cavalry tries to countercharge, but the ground and crowding steal their momentum. For a heartbeat, the gap becomes a vortex of bodies. Then it starts to widen. Slow motion. The moment. Fate arrives. This is the decisive moment, and it unfolds in a kind of slow-motion clarity. A Porus infantryman steps sideways to avoid a flailing elephant trunk. His foot slips in mud. He drops one knee. His shield dips. A Macedonian spear thrust finds the opening in his shoulder. He falls backward, eyes wide, trying to breathe. Behind him, another man sees the fall and moves to fill the space. He is struck in the face by a javelin and stumbles blinded. He turns instinctively away from the enemy and collides with his own ranks. A ripple of disorder spreads. A cavalry rider from Porus's wing tries to push through, but his horse refuses to force itself into the elephant chaos. The animal balks, rears, nearly throws him. In that split second of hesitation, a Macedonian rider drives a spear into his chest. He folds, sliding from the saddle into mud like a discarded cloak. Above them, an elephant wounded trumpets and turns. It pushes backward, not understanding the line behind it is full of its own men. The elephant's huge weight crushes shields, breaks spears, and opens the formation further, creating a widening corridor of panic. Alexander's cavalry rides into that corridor. And now Porus's line begins to fold, not because Porus's men are cowards, but because the shape of the battlefield no longer supports their bravery. The psychological snap. The moment a line begins to fold, every soldier feels it. It is not a shouted announcement. It is a sensation like a floor shifting. Men who were pushing forward suddenly realize they are stepping backward. They glance left and see fewer comrades than a heartbeat ago. They glance right and see a gap where a shield wall should be. They hear an elephant scream and realize the sound is behind them, not ahead. They understand with cold clarity that the battle is slipping out of command. Porus's officers shout for men to hold. They wave standards. They push bodies back into place. But once a fold begins, keeping it from becoming a collapse requires either perfect reserves or miraculous time. Porus has neither. Because Alexander has chosen the exact moment to strike, when Porus's forces are most compressed, most fatigued, most entangled with their own elephants. Now Alexander's cavalry begins to threaten the rear. Not fully behind yet, but close enough that Porus's men can feel the shadow of encirclement, close enough to make every man wonder if the next step backward becomes a rout. Porus himself remains unbroken. He fights wounded, refusing to flee. But even kings cannot hold a line together with will alone when the battlefield's geometry has turned against them. The fate-sealing truth. The fatal turning is not simply a tactical success. It is an emotional one. Alexander's men feel the enemy's uncertainty. They feel the line giving. Their fatigue becomes fury. Their fear becomes momentum. They press, shout, surge. Porus's men feel the pressure tightening. They feel elephants behind them, enemy cavalry pressing from the side infantry. pushing in front. They begin to fight not for victory but for survival. And in that shift from we can win to we must not die, battles are decided. The rain continues. The river roars behind Alexander, and Porus's proud line, once anchored by elephants in certainty, begins to collapse inward like a wall whose foundation has been removed. The field after the roar. When the fatal turning arrives, it does not end the killing at once. It changes the direction of the killing. The battlefield that had been a contest of systems becomes a collapse of bodies, men trying to hold while the shape of the fight betrays them, elephants turning from weapons into stampeding hazards, cavalry pressing into spaces where there is no room left to breathe. The rain keeps falling, washing blood into the mud until the ground looks like it has been bruised. Porus's line folds inward, and the sound of it is not a single scream, it is 1,000 small ones. In the center, elephants trumpet, some in pain, some in panic, some simply because the world has become unbearable. A wounded beast spins and crashes into infantry, crushing men who are still trying to stand in formation. Another elephant surges forward without guidance, colliding with the phalanx, then recoils as spears stab upward. Its handler slumps struck, and the elephant becomes a runaway engine, tearing through whatever is in its way. This is how great battles end, not with clean retreat, but with the battlefield itself becoming the enemy. The collapsed Porus's infantry does not disintegrate immediately. These are not men who crumble at first fear. They fight hard, stepping backward in mud, trying to keep shields aligned, trying to keep elephants from crushing their own ranks. But step backward after step backward becomes a spiral. A man slips, a shield drops, a gap opens, a spear finds it. A second man tries to fill the gap and is struck. Then 3 men step back at once, and now the line has a hole large enough for panic to enter. Alexander's cavalry presses the fold, not pursuing wildly, but steering the collapse, cutting off avenues of organized withdrawal, threatening the rear, forcing Porus's units to turn and face threats from multiple directions at once. A soldier who turns his shield to the side exposes his ribs. A soldier who looks behind him stops seeing what is in front of him. And the battlefield punishes distraction with death. Macedonian light troops dart in like wolves, stabbing at men who lose cohesion, hurling javelins into crowded knots, aiming for officers' standards, anyone who might restore order. The phalanx, battered and bleeding, does not chase far. It advances in a slow, deliberate shove, the way a wall advances when pushed by thousands of shoulders. Sarissas thrust when they can. Shorter weapons take over where pikes have snapped. Every step forward is work. Every step forward is a statement we are still here. Porus's men feel that statement in their bones. They fight on, because to stop fighting is to die. The cost of victory. The field is littered with evidence that Alexander's victory is not cheap. Macedonian dead lie in the mud with their faces turned toward the sky rain, filling open mouths. Some have been crushed by elephants, their bodies broken in ways steel never could. Some have been pierced by spears and left where they fell, armor, heavy limbs tangled. Horses lie 2 massive shapes collapsed on their sides, eyes glassy. A cavalry horse is not merely an animal, it is an engine of war, a comrade of fortune. Seeing them dead hits riders like a second wound. Alexander's officers move through the chaos, shouting, trying to prevent pursuit from becoming disorder. A pursuing army can become a broken army if it scatters too far, especially on a battlefield still haunted by elephants that might turn suddenly by enemy cavalry pockets that could counter-strike in desperation. So Alexander controls the pursuit. He lets Porus's collapse continue, but he does not allow his own system to dissolve into frenzy. It is one of the reasons he has survived so long. Porus's last stand. Porus does not flee. That fact alone becomes legend. Amid the collapse, Porus remains visible, still fighting, still commanding, still refusing to let the battle end in humiliation. His guards cluster around him, men who understand that their king's life is the last pillar of their world. Some accounts describe Porus wounded multiple times, yet refusing to dismount, continuing to direct his men even as the field turns against him. Whether every detail is exact, the spirit fits the reality Porus holds longer than logic permits. But logic wins eventually. Alexander's cavalry pressure tightens, and Porus's remaining coherent units become smaller islands surrounded by enemy movement. The elephants that remain under control are exhausted and bloodied. The infantry that remains is fragmented. The cavalry that remains cannot break free. Porus's world has become a shrinking circle. Finally, Porus's resistance slows, not because his will breaks, but because his body and his army reach their limits. He is wounded, surrounded his remaining men, dying around him. There is a moment quiet compared to the chaos when Porus seems to realize what kind of battle this has been. Not a duel where honor can reverse fate, not a contest of who is braver, a contest of systems, and one system has now won. Porus's guards fight fiercely as Macedonian forces close. A few moments of savage hand-to-hand struggle, mud splashing, steel striking bone. Then Porus is captured alive, not dragged like an animal, not executed on the field, captured. The storm eases and silence arrives. Battles have an eerie rhythm at the end. Noise does not stop all at once. It recedes in waves. First, the roar of the center dulls as formations break, and organized resistance fades. Then the sharp clashes become scattered small fights here and there, desperate last stands, groups of men trying to surrender or escape. Then even those diminish, leaving only the sounds that were always there beneath war rain falling. Men groaning, horses breathing, the distant rumble of the river. Somewhere a wounded elephant stands trembling, no longer guided, no longer attacking, simply existing in pain. It sways trunk-limp eyes, rolling. A handler dead or missing cannot tell it what to do. It becomes an image of war's cruelty, a creature turned into a weapon, and then abandoned in suffering. Macedonian soldiers move among the fallen, searching for friends, dragging wounded out of mud where they might drown in puddles. They pull helmets off faces, checking for breath. They call names. Sometimes someone answers. Often there is only rain. Officers try to count losses, but counting is impossible in the immediate aftermath. Too many bodies, too much mud, too much confusion. Still, the army knows the truth before it is spoken. This victory has cost them dearly. Immediate fallout. With Porus captured, the battle's immediate political reality becomes clear. Alexander has won the crossing, won the field, and gained the leverage to reshape the Punjab's power balance. Porus's army has been broken, and yet the man himself is alive, a fact that will matter more than the dead. Because Alexander does not always destroy what he defeats, sometimes he uses it. As the rain continues to fall and the battlefield quiets into a grim hush, Alexander rides toward the place where Porus is held. Mud clings to his horse's legs. His own armor is streaked dark. The conqueror looks less like a legend now and more like a man who has walked through a storm of flesh. He approaches the defeated king. And in that meeting between conqueror and conquered, the next chapter of the Hydaspes begins. The Vassal Crown. The battle has ended, But the storm has not. Rain still falls over the Hydaspes plain, washing blood from armor, flattening grass into mud, dimming the colors of banners, until everything looks the same gray-brown of exhaustion. Fires sputter where men try to coax warmth from wet wood. The wounded moan softly beneath cloaks. The dead lie with faces turned away from the rain, as if even in death they refuse to look at what happened. And in the midst of this ruin, two kings are brought together. Porus is captured alive. That fact is already unusual in a world where conquered rulers often end as trophies or corpses. But what happens next is stranger still, and it is the reason Hydaspes becomes not only a battle story but a political one. Ancient writers, Arrian, especially later echoed by Plutarch and others, preserve a famous exchange between Alexander and Porus, a scene that has been polished by memory into legend. The exact wording shifts from text to text, but the shape remains. Alexander asks how Porus wishes to be treated. Porus answers with a pride so calm it cuts through the entire battlefield's noise, like a king. Whether the phrase is perfectly authentic or not, the moment rings true because it matches what the battle already proved. Porus did not fight like a desperate man. He fought like a ruler who believed sovereignty was worth dying for. Alexander, standing before him, sees the same truth, and he makes a decision that looks like mercy until you see the steel beneath it. The meeting. After the thunder, Porus is brought forward, guarded but not humiliated. He is wounded, mud-streak exhausted, yet he stands as straight as a man can stand after watching his army collapse around him. His gaze is steady. His posture does not ask for pity. It offers no pleading. Alexander is also altered by the fight. Hydaspes has cost him men he cannot replace easily. Not here, not this far from Macedon. The victory has added territory and prestige, yes, but it has also shown him the shape of India, a land of powerful kings and endless rivers, where every advance costs more than the last. For a moment, the conqueror and the conquered simply look at each other. They are both young enough to be driven by ambition, and old enough already to have seen too many men die for it. Then Alexander speaks. He does not need to shout. The battlefield already knows his authority. He asks the question that will echo in every retelling. How do you wish to be treated? Porus answers without flinching. As a king. It is not defiance for its own sake. It is an assertion of identity. It is Porus refusing to let defeat redefine him as lesser. And in Alexander's mind, something clicks. Why Alexander does not destroy Porus. There are two kinds of conquerors. The first destroys everything that resists, turning kingdoms into ash to prove a point. The second understands that ash cannot govern itself. Alexander, for all his ruthlessness in battle, has repeatedly shown a talent for the second kind when it serves him. He has left satraps in place. He has adopted local customs. He has married into the Persian royal line. He has tried, often imperfectly, to turn conquest into administration. Here, at the edge of the known world, that instinct becomes urgent. Because India is not a single empire that can be toppled and inherited. It is a chain of powers, each watching the other, each capable of rebellion, each capable of forcing Alexander into another Hydaspes. If Alexander kills Porus, he creates a vacuum. Vacuums invite rivals. Rivals invite war. If Alexander installs a puppet with no legitimacy, the people resist. Resistance invites war. If Alexander keeps Porus wounded but alive, he gains something priceless, a local king with authority who can rule in Alexander's name. A vassal crown is cheaper than a garrison, so Alexander does what Porus does not expect. He honors him, not with sentimental kindness, but with calculated respect. He reinstates Porus as ruler, often described as allowing him to keep his kingdom, and even expanded on the condition that Porus acknowledges Macedonian overlordship. In practical terms, Porus becomes a pillar of Alexander's new eastern frontier, a buffer against other powers, a stabilizing force in the Punjab. To Porus it is survival without humiliation. To Alexander it is empire with fewer soldiers required to hold it. The theater of respect. This moment is not only political, it is psychological. Alexander understands the power of spectacle. The way he treated defeated Persian nobles, the way he adopted elements of local ceremony, these were not merely personal choices. They were signals. By treating Porus with respect, Alexander sends a message to every other ruler beyond the Hydaspes. Resistance will be punished, but dignity can be preserved. Submit, and you may keep your throne. Fight, and you may still keep your life if you are valuable enough. It is a dangerous message because it tempts kings into calculation rather than blind defiance. It turns conquest into negotiation. Alexander needs that now. His army is deep in foreign lands, stretched along long supply routes. The farther he goes, the more fragile his control becomes. He cannot afford to slaughter every rival and then rule the ruins with exhausted men. So Porus becomes not merely a conquered enemy, but a tool and ally forged in defeat. The soldiers' unease. Among the Macedonians, the decision lands differently. Some are relieved. They have seen enough blood. They look at the elephant corpses and the crushed bodies and feel no hunger for more killing. Others are uneasy. They have marched for years under a vision of total victory. To them, leaving Porus alive and powerful feels like leaving a dagger on the table. They remember how quickly alliances shift in these lands. They remember that this king fought them to the brink. Can such a man truly be trusted as a vassal? Alexander hears these whispers, even if no one dares speak them openly. He knows that keeping Porus is a gamble. But it is a gamble made from necessity. And necessity is the hidden engine of this entire campaign. The new order on the Hydaspes. Soon the immediate work begins gathering the wounded, burying the dead, repairing equipment, feeding men who have not eaten properly in days. The rain makes everything harder. Fires are scarce. Clothes never dry. Armor rusts. Morale hangs in a precarious balance between triumph and weariness. Alexander establishes new foundations, administrative, military, symbolic. He founds or reinforces settlements, appoints commanders, arranges supplies. The sources often mention the founding of cities and the region markers of Macedonian presence, meant to outlast the march. Porus, now restored, becomes part of this framework. His cooperation gives Alexander access to local networks, food routes, intelligence. His authority gives legitimacy to Alexander's new order. It is conquest transformed into rule. But beneath the formalities, a deeper change is happening, one that no treaty can prevent. Alexander's men are growing tired, not just physically, but spiritually. They have crossed deserts and mountains. They have fought kings and armies. They have marched farther than any Macedonian should have to march. They have seen elephants crush comrades into mud. Victory at Hydaspes does not feel like a triumphant climax. It feels like a warning. And as Alexander looks eastward toward yet another river, the Hyphasis, he senses the truth forming like thunder behind cloud. The battle is won. The campaign may not be. Mutiny at the edge of the world. Victory has a scent. Sometimes it smells like smoke and hot metal, the sharp tang of a city burning. Sometimes it smells like dust and sweat, the aftertaste of a long pursuit. At the Hydaspes, victory smells like wet earth and blood diluted by rain, like triumph that has been dragged through mud until it no longer shines. In the days after the battle, Alexander's army moves again, not with the soaring hunger that carried it through Persia, not with the bright certainty that once made the impossible feel routine, but with the heavy rhythm of men who have learned what the next horizon costs. The wounded limp. The healthy carry more weight to compensate. Armor is scraped clean and still feels dirty. Horses are fewer. Officers' voices are hoarse from shouting through storm. The monsoon does not stop merely because a king has won. It continues indifferent, turning roads into rivers and camps into swamps. And yet Alexander looks east, always east. Because the map in his mind is not finished, there is another river ahead, the Hyphasis known today as the Bees, one more boundary, one more line of water and rumor. Beyond it lies deeper India, a land his men have only heard of in fragments, richer kingdoms, larger armies, more elephants, and the frightening suggestion that this is only the beginning. To Alexander, that is a challenge. To his soldiers, it is a sentence. The march that feels like a funeral. Imagine marching after Hydaspes. Your sandals are never dry. Your skin is rubbed raw. Every step into wet ground pulls at your legs as if the earth is trying to keep you. At night you sleep in dampness and wake colder than you should in a land that should be warm. You dream of elephant screams. You dream of comrades sinking into a river. You wake to rain tapping your shield like a relentless finger. And you count the miles, not forward, but backward. How far from Macedon now? How far from your father's grave? How far from the olive groves, the familiar sky, the language that belongs to you? The campaign has already stretched into years. Many of the men who crossed into Asia with Alexander have died in Persia, in sieges, in mountain passes. Replacements have come, yes, reinforcements, allies, new contingents. But replacements do not carry the same memory of home. They do not carry the same reason for being here. Hydaspes has shaken something loose in the army spirit, because Hydaspes proved that even Alexander can bleed. And that is a dangerous thing for an army to realize when it has been surviving on the belief that their king is a kind of storm that cannot be resisted. Alexander's vision versus human limits. Alexander does not see exhaustion as destiny. He sees it as another enemy to conquer. He speaks of glory, of the world's edge, of finishing what no man has finished, of stepping beyond the boundaries that have always contained human ambition. He truly believes that if he stops now, the story will be incomplete, that the gods have carried him this far not to turn back at another river. But his soldiers are not gods. They are men who have carried shields until their shoulders ache in their sleep, men who have watched elephants crush friends into mud, men who have marched so long that the idea of home has begun to feel like a story told by someone else. They listen to Alexander's words, and for the first time in years, the words do not ignite them. They simply weigh more. The edge of the world appears. At last the army reaches the Hyphasis, another river, another barrier. It runs through a landscape lush and heavy with moisture, where the air is thick and the ground seems to breathe. On the far side is unknown. Not empty unknown, populated unknown, full of potential enemies who might fight like Porus or worse. The scouts bring reports. The rumors harden into frightening detail. Kingdoms beyond with large forces, more cavalry, more elephants, perhaps even larger elephants trained and armored, used in numbers that make Hydaspes look like a warning shot. Whether every rumor is accurate is almost irrelevant. What matters is what the army believes, and the army believes the East is endless. Alexander calls his commanders. He speaks of opportunity and inevitability. He points across the river, as if he can already see the future standing there waiting for him. The men listen from ranks behind faces, hard eyes tired. Then something happens that changes the campaign more than any battle. The army refuses. The mutiny. It is not a riot, not at first. It is silence, a refusal to step forward, a refusal to prepare for the crossing, a refusal that spreads without needing a leader, because every man already carries the same exhaustion in his bones. Officers argue, some plead, some threaten. But threats cannot make a man want what he no longer wants. Pleading cannot undo years of distance. Alexander's anger rises like fire under wet wood, hot, frustrated, desperate to burn. He has faced armies and storms and mountains, and always he has found a way through. But there is no way through an army that will not walk. This is the one enemy he cannot outflank, the one wall he cannot climb. He steps forward, and the camp hushes. The rain seems to soften, as if even the sky is listening. He speaks fierce, commanding, wounded in pride. He reminds them of what they have already done, of how far they have come, of the glory that will belong to them if they follow him one more river, one more push. He speaks like a man trying to bend fate back into shape. But the men do not move, because Hydaspes did something no speech can erase. It made them feel mortal again. And mortality is heavier than glory. Coenus and the hard truth. In some tellings of the campaign, a commander often identified as Coenus voices what the army feels, that the men have earned their return, that they are exhausted, that they cannot go farther. Whether the exact speech is preserved or shaped by later writers, the essence is plausible because it captures the logic of mutiny a king can demand, a commander can command. But an army cannot be forced to conquer the unknown when it has run out of belief. The argument is not cowardice, it is arithmetic. Men are dead, supplies are strained, weather is brutal, enemies ahead are numerous, home is impossibly far. The East is not a single throne to seize, it is a continent of rivers. Alexander listens, jaw-tight eyes burning. For him this is not merely resistance, it is betrayal. Because Alexander has built an identity on forward motion. Stopping feels like death of a different kind, the death of the story he tells himself about who he is. He withdraws into his tent. He refuses to speak. He waits as if silence from a king might shame the army into obedience. Days pass. The army does not break. The moment Alexander yields. When Alexander finally emerges, the decision is written in his face before any words are spoken. He will turn back. Not because he is defeated in battle, not because Porus beat him, not because the Hyphasis is uncrossable. He turns back because even Alexander cannot conquer exhaustion. And that truth is more tragic than any battlefield death, because it exposes the limit beneath the legend, the king is still a man, bound to what his men can bear. He announces sacrifice to the god ceremonies to mark the farthest reach of his march symbols, that he tries to turn into a kind of victory. He claims the turning back is also a choice, not a surrender. But in the hearts of the soldiers, the meaning is simple and profound. They are going home, or at least they are going west. The east behind them. As the army begins its return, the landscape does not change. The rain still falls. The rivers still flow. India remains vast, unconquered in its depths, stretching beyond the place where Alexander's dream stops. Behind them, the Hyphasis runs on silent, indifferent, keeping the secrets of what might have been. Ahead of them lies a journey no less dangerous than the conquest rivers to descend deserts, to cross politics to manage rebellions to prevent wounds that will fester. Alexander has won at Hydaspes, but now the campaign's direction has reversed. And when an army turns back from the edge of the world, it carries something with it heavier than treasure, the knowledge that the horizon can refuse you. The long road. Back. When Alexander turns back from the Hyphasis, it does not feel like a retreat. It feels like a wound being closed. Not neatly, not without pain, closed with grit and reluctant acceptance, the way a soldier binds a cut because there is no other choice. The army that once moved east with a hunger that bordered on faith now moves west with a different rhythm, heavy, practical, silent, in places where it once sang. Behind them, the Hyphasis flows on indifferent. Ahead of them, the long road back unfolds like a second campaign, one fought not for glory, but for survival. The storm season still hangs over the land. Rivers remain swollen. The ground remains soft underfoot. And though the eastward dream has ended, danger has not, because turning back does not undo what has been done. Alexander has inserted his empire into a world of rival kingdoms and endless frontiers, and that empire must now be held, or at least not lost immediately, while his army is exhausted, far from home, and increasingly aware that the king's will is not enough to change weather distance and human limits. The Hydaspes victory, once the climax of conquest, now becomes the hinge of a larger story. A story about what remains after thunder. The return begins in rivers. Alexander chooses to go back along waterways when he can. Rivers are roads in this land, wide, relentless roads that carry men and supplies faster than mud-choked marches. The Hydaspes itself, then the broader river systems beyond, become corridors for the return. But rivers are not gentle roads. They drown the careless. They scatter the disorganized. They turn boats into coffins if storms rise suddenly. They demand discipline, even after battle, when discipline is hardest to maintain. Men who survived elephants now fight currents. Men who fought in mud now learn again the terror of water. Boats scrape on hidden shallows. Rations spoil in damp. Disease spreads in camps where clothes never truly dry. Alexander's officers struggle to keep the army coherent. They organize flotillas, assign guards, ration supplies, and force order, with the hard knowledge that a returning army can still fall apart through hunger sickness and the slow corrosion of morale. Victory does not shield you from rot, and rot is what kills empires that stretch too far. The shadow of Hydaspes. Even as the army moves back, Hydaspes remains with them, not as a place but as a memory. Veterans remember comrades crushed under elephant feet. They remember the river at night, black and roaring, taking men without ceremony. They remember the moment the line nearly broke, the moment fear almost outran discipline. They speak less about glory now and more about cost. For Alexander, the battle is also a memory, but it is a different kind. He remembers not only the tactics, the deception, the victory. He remembers Porus unbroken, even in defeat, a king whose dignity forced Alexander to see that conquest is not always about annihilation, and that decision restoring Porus, turning him into a vassal ally, becomes one of Alexander's most lasting acts in the region, because it plants a seed, not just of Macedonian influence, but of a new kind of political reality, Greek power intertwined with local kingship, foreign rule, balanced by indigenous authority. It is not India conquered. It is India touched and changed, and changing in return. The Greek echo. What does Alexander leave behind? Not simply fortresses and garrisons, though those matter. Not simply administrators, though those matter too. He leaves behind an opening. Routes that were once distant become connected by the march of an army. Trade begins to follow the footprints of conquest. Greek soldiers settle in new towns. Merchants and craftsmen move along safer corridors. Ideas begin to travel in both directions: language, coinage, art methods of war. The ancient world does not transform overnight. It rarely does. But the Hydaspes campaign creates conditions that will echo for generations, feeding later waves of Hellenic presence in the northwest, what later history will recognize in the emergence of Indo-Greek realms in artistic and cultural blending across frontier zones, in the lingering memory that Greeks once came here with a king who believed the world had an edge. Even if Alexander does not reach that edge, he reshapes the map of possibility, and in doing so, he reshapes the region's future. The unfinished empire. Yet the return is haunted by a darker truth. Alexander's empire is enormous, held together by momentum fear and the fragile loyalty of men who have been dragged far from home. Momentum has now reversed. The army is not conquering, it is withdrawing. The psychological spell of constant victory weakens when the horizon is behind you. In the months that follow, the campaign's dangers become as lethal as any battle-harsh terrain: strained supplies, resistance in pockets, the grinding reality of administering conquered lands while the conqueror is still moving. In some traditions, Alexander's return includes brutal marches through difficult regions, losses to hunger and heat, and constant political strain. Even without dwelling on every later hardship, the pattern is clear. An empire built fast is hard to stabilize. And India, vast and complex, will not be held by a single battle, no matter how dramatic. Porus remains an ally for now, but alliances are living things. They can weaken, they can be tested, they can be reshaped by other powers once Alexander's immediate presence fades. Alexander's triumph at Hydaspes gave him prestige, territory, and a political foothold. It did not give him permanence. The tragedy beneath the legend. There is a quiet tragedy in the final image of Hydaspes. Alexander, the man who marched farther than any of his peers could imagine, is forced to turn back, not by defeat at the hands of an enemy king, but by the refusal of his own men. It is a reminder that even the greatest conqueror is bound to human limits. His soldiers are not machines. His companions are not immortal. His dream cannot move forward when the people carrying it collapse under its weight. And yet, Alexander still matters. Because his ambition, even checked, still reshaped worlds, his choices violent and brilliant, ruthless and strategic, opened doors that would not close easily. The frontier between Greek and Indian spheres became more porous, more connected, more alive with exchange and conflict. The Hydaspes stands at that frontier like a monument made of mud and thunder, a battle that proved Alexander's genius, a battle that proved Porus's dignity, a victory that cost so much it became a warning. The river keeps flowing. In the end, the Hydaspes does what rivers always do. It keeps flowing. It carries away blood and broken wood. It carries away the footprints of kings. It carries away the names of men who died without being remembered by chroniclers. It runs past the place where elephants once screamed, and past the bank where Macedonian soldiers once clung to roots in the rain, and it does not slow down. History will remember the battle as a turning point, Alexander's eastern apex, Porus's hard-fought defeat, the last great victory before mutiny forced the dream to turn west. But the river does not care about turning points. It cares only about gravity, and that indifference is the final lesson of Hydaspes. Empires rise because men believe they can command the world. Empires fall when the world reminds them it cannot be commanded forever. Alexander rides back toward the west, toward Babylon, toward a future he cannot fully see. Porus rules again under a new reality, crowned with survival and shadowed by defeat. And somewhere behind them, under Monsoon cloud, the Hydaspes flows on, still roaring, still indifferent, holding both names in its current, as if to say, "You were great, and you were temporary."